Has met here in Paris to talk about the skyrocketing youth unemployment. It's the latest in a flurry of meetings and measures since German Chancellor Angela Merkel says the issue was the most pressing facing the continent. But despite all of their efforts, the jobless rate still continues to rise. And today's meeting is expected to offer little in terms of fixing the youth unemployment rate here in Europe, which currently stands at around 23.5%. Now, just to give you some idea of comparison, in the US, the rate is about 16%. So have we passed the point of no return for Europe's lost generation? Here to talk about it with me today, here in the studio, is Bastien, an entrepreneur and co-founder of Les Moineaux, a network which represents the interests of young entrepreneurs. Matthias, FEKL, a Socialist Member of Parliament. Alexander STILLE, a contributor to The New Yorker, who's currently based here in Paris, and France 24's very own Europe editor, Christophe. ROBEET. And a reminder that you, the viewer, can send in your tweets and tell us what you think via the hashtag F24Debate. But first, let's take a listen to what the leaders had to say at the summit.
What's at stake is the future of a generation that's been affected by unemployment for years, and that continues to be placed in a situation of doubt and hopelessness because of the financial crisis.
S'il y a trois mots qu'il faut retenir de notre sommet.
If there are three words to take away from this summit, they are these: speed, because this situation is urgent; solidarity, because we cannot abandon this generation; and finally, quality, because what we need to offer are jobs and training that allow real prospects for these young people.
De véritables perspectives pour les jeunes.
We, as member countries of the European Union, are obviously doing everything we can to improve the conditions for growth. Because without growth, we can't create new jobs. And those who suffer the most from that are young people.
Christophe, ROBEET, you actually been following this summit today. Did anything actually ever come out of it?
Well, nothing new really, but it wasn't a surprise because this is the second conference following a conference, you remember, Annette, that took place in July in Berlin. I have to say this round of conferences was initiated by the German Chancellor Angela Merkel. But still, having all these leaders, 24 heads of state and government, plus the President of the Council, the President of the Commission and the President of the European Parliament, all saying the same thing, basically. We've got a problem, a huge problem, and this is probably the saddest consequence of the European crisis. This is, of course, a strong message in terms of what European leaders have announced. As I said, nothing new. They've pledged 12 billion euros over the next 2 years. This amount is expected to be matched by the European Investment Bank and the European Social Fund.
This is the Youth Guarantee Scheme, isn't it? What exactly does it involve? It's every young European who gets a job or apprenticeship within 4 months of becoming unemployed or leaving formal education. That's right, that's the scheme you're referring to.
Absolutely. What the EU leaders have understood is that they need to break this vicious circle. What is the situation today? You have thousands of young people who graduate from universities, who leave school, and then are left abandoned. They can't find a job for 1, 2, 3 years. Their CV is totally blank, and this is bad on the labour market. You know it like I do. So what they're trying to do is help these young people. Okay, you don't have a job. After 4 months, we'll provide either additional education or job opportunities. My question, though, is there enough money on the table? Of course no. And there was a very important point made by the German Chancellor, and that was very interesting. He said, look, it's not politicians who create jobs, it's companies, SMEs, big companies. Let's not forget that this has to go through reforms, labour reforms, job market reforms. You have to have basically competitive companies that can create jobs. That's the only solution. That was the message from the German Chancellor tonight.
Bastien, we were just talking there about that youth guarantee scheme. Is that enough?
I think the same as you just said. Merkel is right on something. And when Hollande said that he will offer some jobs, I don't understand. It's not the state who offers some job, it's companies. So it depends where the money goes. If the money goes to help some companies to hire some youth, that will be useful. But what we see these days in France is that the money is going to hire people in public or non-profit organization. So it's not enough it's enough if we use it this way, but otherwise it's not enough.
Matthias, at the end of the day, you can throw as much money as you like at schemes, but don't countries, especially France, they need to restructure their labour markets, don't they?
Well, the restructuring of the labour market has been done because that was the aim of the Accord National Interprofessionnel, a big, very important reform that was first debated by the social partners, the employees and employers, and then voted by Parliament. But what we see today with this European conference, which is a French and German initiative, that's why there was one part in Berlin, and this follow-up meeting today, is that finally European leaders understand that they cannot work against or without youth. And I completely agree. It's not politicians who create jobs. What politicians can do, and what we all try to do, is to create the environment so that companies can work and do their job. And you see, I was these last days in my constituency, in Lot-et-Garonne, like every week, and we signed Emploi d'Avenir. It's an important reform which was voted by on the proposition of the French President François Hollande. And this is a reform which gives a chance to young people who are completely far away now from the labor market because they had difficulties at school, because they are completely far away from business, from work, and they get a chance again. And when you see them in businesses, in enterprises, in small businesses, small companies, you see that you create hope again, and that they will have education, that they will have the job, and also the opportunity to get formed. So there are lots of things to be done. Reform of the labor market, concrete propositions, and in France there's lots to be done to help young entrepreneurs, businesses, to create their jobs and to create their
I can see
ideas.
Bastien obviously wants to weigh in at this point.
You're taking an interesting example is the Emploi d'Avenir, which is a state government contract. You said it's for people to go in small companies. No, it's only for young people to work in non-profit organizations.
No, it's not true. I'm sorry, but it's not
only
true.
For this.
No, it's not true.
I have been working on the subject for 1 year.
I signed on Friday contracts in businesses, so I suppose that they were not invented.
I guess it's a special type of businesses because, so just if I can continue on this, it's only non-profit organization who can hire some young people, and we know that when you go in a non-profit organization, you will not become more employable for the future. You become less and less employable because you don't know what's a customer, you don't know what's a turnover, you don't have all these constraints.
You don't have private sector experience. Alexander,
I'm sorry, because it was true in the beginning that the reform was shaped for non-profit organizations, but very quickly it was widened to business. So today it is really for all. I promise.
Well, I'll check. No, thank you. I'll check. But I think it's
at
special
this point, let's just move on. Alexander, being from the States and obviously having experience with a different form of labour market, what strikes you?
Well, it strikes me a couple of things. France is somewhat, if you look at unemployment and youth unemployment internationally, and you look at the map of Europe as well, you see great variations. You see much lower levels in Scandinavia, high levels in France, but worse in Spain, Italy. And one of the differences is that labor markets are more flexible in Scandinavia than they are in France and Italy, for example. And you tend to have, in both France and Italy, a kind of bifurcated labor market where you have some people have salaried jobs which are extremely protected. It's almost impossible to fire someone. And then very precarious internship stages, invented precarious contract jobs for the younger people, which don't really get them into the employment market in a serious way. And so I do think that I wouldn't necessarily push. I come from the States where we have a rather brutal you eat what you kill labor market, and that can be maybe isn't necessarily where Europe wants to go, but more flexibility and the ability to fire someone who isn't performing well seems a basic
Christophe.
part of that.
And you're absolutely right. We're all talking about Europe's labour market. There isn't such a thing as a European labour market. There are some European rules, but when you look at the reality, look at Germany, Ireland, you mentioned Italy, these are completely different systems. Look at the level of corporate taxes in Ireland and compare it with France. So there isn't a single European system, and you're right, the gap is absolutely massive. Youth unemployment in Germany stands at 7.7%.
Let me at this
over
point...
60% in Greece.
Let me just at this point bring up a graphic, because we've got some of those figures so we can follow on from that. And we should have a graphic coming up on your screen shortly, which will show youth unemployment in various European countries. In the UK, it's 21%, which is interesting because the UK is obviously very different in the way it operates compared to France. In France, it's 26%. In Spain, it's 56.5%. In Greece, it's a staggering 57.3%. In Germany, as you just pointed out, 7.7%. And in Austria, 8.7%. And Christophe, as you've noted there, there's obviously great differences between those various European nations.
Absolutely. And it's true that this is a reflection of the crisis. We know that Spain, Italy, Greece have suffered most in Europe, and that explains why their youth unemployment levels have literally skyrocketed. You know, the Spanish talk of la generación perdida, the lost generation. When you see that 50%, when we talk about youth unemployment, we look at people aged between 15 and 24. But when you look at Spain, when you think that more than half Spanish youngsters are either out of work or out of university, it's an absolutely tragic situation.
It's a possible recipe for revolution. It doesn't necessarily just exist as a risk in Spain, but I think across much of Europe. Matthias, as we were just saying, in Germany their youth unemployment stands at just 7.7%, which they say reflects a vibrant economy. What can France and other European nations learn from Germany?
I grew up in Germany until I was 18, so I think there are two interesting things in Germany. First, the education system is much more pragmatic maybe than it is here, and there are more relationships with the needs of the economic sector. And so in France, the problem we have is that lots of young people are oriented into ways where there are no jobs, and we have a very important reform to do on orientation, to bring the young generations to sectors where there are jobs and not to sectors where there's unemployment and no future. And the second thing is, in Germany you don't have all these glass ceilings, all these prejudices. In France you have to have a diploma, and if you don't have a diploma you're not useless.
It's a very rigid system for an outsider.
It's very rigid, and it's completely stupid, because what you see is that lots of people can be very bad at school and can be great in businesses. Of course, you can also be good at school and good
Matthias,
at business. But so there's something in our minds, in our philosophy, that has to change on that aspect.
And you're a socialist member.
Yes.
I mean, how many people would...
perfect.
No, but how many people in your party share your views? Because I would say there'd be a few who would disagree, if not more.
I don't think so. There are lots of people on the socialist benches in Parliament who know very well what happens, because we see it on the local level. And when we act, we try to be pragmatic. And lots of work that is done in the regions, in the cities, is very pragmatic, because there's no other way. And so sometimes the political debate in France is very caricatural, and you think that all the left is against business, which is not true.
I just at this point, let me read out a tweet we've got here from Olo114, and he says, or she says, only fear of social revolution would make European leaders deal with youth unemployment. What do you say to that, Bastien?
What was the tweet again? Sorry.
that we're looking at possibility, that only a revolution as such would make European politicians stand up and take notice and do something.
The thing is, Matthias was right on the point, is that there's a huge problem in orientation in France, and lots of kids from the suburbs mainly have big problems on this. They don't come from the good suburbs, so they can't find job. They don't have the good name, the good color of skin, the good parents, so they cannot do anything. And the problem is that they can't organize because the revolution should come from these suburbs, not from somewhere else, because too many people in France are happy with the situation we have. I don't think that youth have cannot do a revolution right now in France.
Well,
Alexander.
I think a couple of points are worth dwelling on. The unemployment numbers among young people look very different depending on what social group you're looking at. And as you pointed out, there's a great rigidity in the French system in terms of education level. And in fact, youth unemployment is quite low among people who are university graduates. It is lower and among people who've done their bac, and for people who left school early, it's extremely high. And there's very little second chances in the French system. You get eliminated quickly, and once you're off the track, you're kind of on a road to nowhere. The other thing, which relates to what Bastien said, is that the unemployment rates are much greater among the children, grandchildren of immigrants, people living in the so-called défavorisés areas. And so you can't separate this problem of youth unemployment for other really big structural problems in French society to deal with the education system, the difficulty of integrating newer groups into society and problems like that.
The problems that Alexander just outlined, is that unique to France, or is that the case elsewhere?
No, it's not unique to France. And actually, when you look at youth unemployment in France at 26%, the country is pretty much, in the EU average. I'm not saying that this is good. This is, of course, way too much. But you mentioned Germany. I recently traveled to Germany, and I was able to see how the system of dual education and apprenticeship works. What really struck me is that it's a very prestigious system. Unlike here in France, if your son is not doing well at school, Annette, you'll be told probably that he can't go further. And this will be regarded as a failure. Well, in Germany, it's not the case. A lot of apprenticeships are actually valued, and young people are happy to work in companies. They're proud of it. And when they turn 18, well, most of the time they get hired by these companies, and the companies are very, very happy because they have highly skilled, well-trained and motivated youngsters. So I think there is a very elitist approach here in France. Not only in France, it's also the case in Italy and partly in Spain. And that is part of the problem. There is a huge mismatch in terms of skills. There are a lot of unemployed youth and there are a lot of unfilled vacancies.
Christophe, ROBEET, just press the pause button because we need to take a break now, and I'll be back with my guests shortly for the second part of the France 24 debate.